The ambush that was supposed to be a clean capture began long before her plane appeared in the sky. The men who planned it spent weeks studying the dirt airstrip, the guard rotations, the weather patterns, even the sound of approaching aircraft. They knew the transport plane would arrive at dawn, flying low, carrying supplies, and a single pilot. They assumed the pilot would be routine military personnel. They built every part of their plan around that assumption. To them it was simple. Hit fast, take the aircraft, grab the pilot, move out before anyone nearby realized something was wrong. They believed they were smarter. They believed they were in control. The airstrip looked harmless enough at sunrise. A thin layer of dust hung over the runway. Crushed gravel edges faded into tall grass on both sides. The only structure in sight was a half-collapsed shack where a windsock used to hang. Nothing suggested danger, and that was the point. The attackers wanted it to look empty and quiet. They hid in the brush before first light, arranged in a loose semicircle facing the landing zone. Some crouched behind logs. Others stayed low inside shallow pits they had carved the night before. They rehearsed hand signals to avoid any noise that might give away their position. The entire setup felt almost too easy to them. While they waited, they checked their gear again and again. They wanted a clean capture, not a fight. They had ropes, restraints, and small blocks of wood to wedge the plane's wheels once it landed. They expected the pilot to step out confused, maybe startled, probably scared. They pictured themselves surrounding her in a smooth and practiced motion. No resistance, no surprises. Speed and numbers on their side. They believed they had the edge because they chose the terrain and the timing. The first hint of the plane came as a faint hum. It grew from a soft vibration to a steady rumble that cut across the field. Sunlight caught the aircraft as it broke over the treeline, nose dipping gently. It looked like a standard military transport, nothing special, slow enough that the attackers felt confident. They spread out just a little more, ready to close in the moment the wheels touched dirt. The plane banked once, engines steady and calm, and began its final approach. From the outside it all appeared predictable. A controlled descent. A familiar landing sequence. No alarms. No sudden changes. Everything matched their expectations, and that false comfort locked in their confidence. The pilot lowered the landing gear and lined up with the runway. The attackers counted down in their heads. 10 seconds. 5. 3. The wheels hit with a short burst of dust, trailed by a rolling cloud as the plane slowed. As the aircraft moved down the runway, the men stepped closer to the edge of the grass. They stayed low but already imagined the moment they would rush out. Their leader lifted 2 fingers. That was the signal to get ready. The men tightened their grips and leaned forward. They felt the thrill of a trap about to spring shut. The plane coasted to a stop as planned. Nothing hinted at resistance. They expected the pilot to power down, unlatch the door, step out with slow measured movements. They expected a figure weighed down by flight gear and routine habits. They never pictured a SEAL behind the controls. They never imagined a pilot trained to read ambushes as easily as others read street signs. They misread the stillness inside the cockpit. They saw calm and assumed compliance. They saw no movement and thought it meant fear. They waited for the perfect moment to surge forward. The aircraft sat quiet for 3 full seconds. In those seconds, the attackers believed they had achieved complete control. They started creeping from the brush, trusting the plan they polished for weeks. They had no idea that their trap had already begun to crack. They had no idea the person inside the cockpit had seen their mistakes long before the wheels touched the ground. They moved with the certainty of hunters who thought they owned the field, unaware that the advantage they counted on was already slipping out of their hands. Her split-second read of the threat began long before the attackers realized she had spotted them. From the cockpit, she had a clean, panoramic view of the field, the treeline, and every shadow that did not belong. A Navy SEAL learns early that danger rarely announces itself with noise or movement. It shows up first as something small and out of place. A shape too rigid. Grass pressed down the wrong way. Dust settling in a pattern that hints someone crossed where they should not have been. She scanned for details the same way other people breathe. Automatic. Constant. Essential. As she approached the runway, she saw the grass on the left side move in a way the wind could not have caused. It wasn't a bend. It was a brief recoil, the kind that happens when someone shifts their weight while trying to stay hidden. She did not react outwardly. No sharp turn. No throttle spike. Nothing to hint she had seen the problem. She held her approach steady while her mind began stitching together pieces of information. The faint tracks in the dirt near the tree line. The unnatural stillness in the field, as if the place itself was holding its breath. The fact that this runway usually had at least one maintenance worker nearby, yet today it sat empty. She knew something was wrong, and she knew it wasn't random. She remembered the intelligence briefing from the night before. Rumors of a local group trying to intercept military equipment. Nothing solid, mostly whispers, but enough to make her wonder if this run might be more than a routine supply drop. That was why she lowered her altitude earlier than expected. She wanted a closer look at the ground. She wanted more angles, more information. When the shapes in the grass caught her eye, she understood those whispers had not been rumors. They were clues. As the plane descended, she widened her attention to every corner of her vision. She didn't stare at anything for more than a second. Staring alerts an enemy. Instead, she let her eyes sweep lightly, noticing the paths between shadows, the shimmer of metal behind the brush, the faint outline of a man's shoulder where a mound of dirt didn't match the terrain. By the time her wheels touched the ground, she had counted at least 8 attackers, possibly more hiding deeper in the brush. She saw their formation, the way they had spread themselves into a half-circle designed to close in with speed. She recognized the tactic. Simple, efficient, built to intimidate and overwhelm. It worked on inexperienced pilots. It wouldn't work on her. Every sense sharpened as she rolled down the runway. She listened for the sound of boots shifting in dirt. She watched the tree line for the faint lift of a rifle barrel. She scanned the right side of the field for an escape path if everything collapsed. Her pulse stayed steady. Her breathing stayed slow. She filtered every detail the same way she filtered oxygen. Clarity in, distraction out. She could feel the attack forming before it happened. It was like watching a storm build on the horizon, except she was sitting right under it. She noticed the attackers growing bolder as the plane slowed. One of them leaned forward too far, lifting his head a few inches above the tall grass. Another shifted his stance and exposed the edge of a weapon. They believed she hadn't seen them. Their confidence made them sloppy. Sloppiness made them predictable. Predictability gave her time, and time was all she needed. She read their leader in the same instant. He raised his hand to signal the advance. He hesitated for half a second, maybe expecting a reaction from the pilot. She gave him nothing. She stayed still in the cockpit, her hands resting lightly on the controls, eyes forward, posture calm. That calmness misled them. They saw it as fear or confusion. They did not understand it was assessment. Inside her head, she mapped every possible move. If they rushed from the left, she had an angle to pivot. If they surged from both sides, she had enough speed to swing the tail and create a dust barrier. If they tried to block the cockpit door, she had tools within arm's reach to handle close contact. She reviewed these options not with panic, but with practiced clarity. She had drilled for ambushes in forests, deserts, abandoned streets, mock airfields, and even during night flights. The environment changed. The principle stayed the same. You don't wait for the enemy to act. You identify the moment they think they have control, then you take it from them. She saw that moment when the grass shifted in one wide sweep as the attackers prepared to rise together. She recognized the rhythm that signals a group about to move. She sensed their confidence peak right before execution. And in that brief window, just a few heartbeats before the ambush came alive, she understood exactly what she would do next. The escape move only a SEAL pilot would attempt began forming in her mind the moment she saw the attackers start to rise. She knew she had seconds, maybe less, before they surged toward the aircraft. A standard response would have been to lock the cockpit, radio for help, and hope reinforcements reached her before the attackers breached the fuselage. A cautious pilot would stay put and let the aircraft become a shield. A conventional military pilot might even try to power up for a straight takeoff, but that move would expose the plane's underbelly to gunfire and block the runway with its own slow acceleration. None of those options gave her what she needed. She wanted control. She wanted unpredictability. She wanted to hit them before they understood what was happening. Her eyes shifted to the dust pattern drifting across the runway. The wind had picked up just slightly, sweeping from the right side toward the left. It was subtle, but it mattered. Dust was a weapon when used right. It blinded, disoriented, and hid movement. She noted the small mound of loose gravel near the tail, the narrow strip of grass that had been flattened by tires earlier that morning, and the slight downhill slope toward the far end of the field. Every piece of terrain was a tool. She just needed to choose how to use it. She nudged the throttle with a small, controlled push. Not enough to roar. Not enough to alert them. Just enough to make the aircraft roll a few feet forward. The attackers didn't notice. They were still rising from the grass, still adjusting their grips, still expecting a frightened pilot to step out with hands raised. They were watching the door, not the wheels. That was their first mistake. She kept the movement slow as if the plane were drifting from its own momentum. Her hands never twitched. Her shoulders stayed level. Anyone watching from the outside would think she hadn't noticed a thing. But inside she was calculating distance, angles, and reaction times with absolute precision. She measured how long it would take to spin the aircraft if she hit both rudder and throttle in one sudden move. She measured the wind speed and how much dust the turn would kick up. She measured the attackers' positions and how quickly they could react once they realized the trap was turning on them. When the aircraft reached the small patch of flattened grass, she exhaled one short breath. That was her trigger. In a single motion, she slammed the throttle forward, snapped the rudder hard to the right, and tilted the yoke just enough to shift weight across the landing gear. The plane didn't leap. It snapped. The tail swung out fast, cutting across the runway with a burst of gravel. The turn was tight enough to surprise anyone watching, but controlled enough to keep the aircraft stable. Dust exploded outward in a wide arc that swallowed the left flank of the ambush. The attackers shouted, but their voices came out tangled in the roar of the engine. They scrambled to track the cockpit, but the dust cloud blinded them. They expected a slow taxi or a panicked attempt at escape. They got a maneuver built from airfield combat drills that most pilots never even used. She kept the spin going for a full half circle, using the aircraft's momentum to widen the dust shield. The wind carried the cloud straight into the attackers' positions. Their perfect formation collapsed. They couldn't see each other. They couldn't see the plane. They could barely see their own hands. She took advantage of the confusion and pushed the throttle again, rolling the plane backward down the slope the ambushers had ignored. She wasn't trying to fly yet. She wanted distance. She wanted angles that broke the semicircle and turned their plan inside out. The attackers fired a warning shot, but it hit nothing. They still couldn't find her through the dust wall. As the plane rolled farther down the incline, she kept her eyes fixed on the thinning edge of the cloud. She knew exactly when she would burst through it. Her timing had to be perfect. Too soon, and they might recover. Too late, and she'd lose the element of surprise. She listened to the engine, felt the ground vibration through the pedals, and waited for the dust to shift in the air. When the moment came, she went full throttle. The aircraft shot out of the cloud like a launched spear. The attackers closest to the runway stumbled backward, unprepared for the sudden change. She saw them flinch. She saw them turn their shoulders. She saw the precise instant the second wave froze in confusion because the aircraft was no longer where they thought it was. She angled the plane toward the open end of the field. Her turn had broken their formation, and her burst from the dust had shattered their timing. The ambush was no longer an ambush. It was chaos, and she had created that chaos on purpose. She wasn't fleeing. She was repositioning for the next move, one they never expected a transport pilot to attempt. How training turned chaos into control started with the instincts she had spent years hardwiring into her body. In the dust cloud she created, most pilots would have felt overwhelmed. Visibility gone. Engine noise bouncing in every direction. No clear red on where the attackers were regrouping. But to her, this was familiar terrain. She had trained in blackout scenarios where instructors pumped smoke into the cockpit. She had practiced emergency taxi drills with alarms blaring so loud the floor shook. She had flown low-visibility runs in storms that slapped the aircraft sideways. Chaos was not something she avoided. It was something she learned to read like weather. As the dust settled in irregular patterns across the field, she recognized the rhythm immediately. When dust moves in sharp bursts, it means someone is rushing through it. When it rolls low, something heavy is pushing air near the ground. When it hangs too long, it means the attackers have stopped moving and are pausing to rethink their positions. She could almost map their confusion without seeing a single one of them. Her instructors once told her that a real pilot does not fly with just eyes and instruments. A real pilot uses every sense: touch, hearing, pressure, rhythm. She understood that now more than ever. She slowed the throttle just a touch to listen through the engine noise. Not to hear specific voices, but to feel breaks in the echo. Silence in the wrong place meant regrouping. Clusters of short sounds meant nervous movement. A longer clatter meant someone dropped equipment. She heard all of this layered together and sorted it the way a musician sorts notes into a pattern. One group was sweeping left, trying to regain position. Another group hesitated in the center where their leader had last stood. A third group, smaller and less confident, pulled back toward the tree line to avoid getting caught in the open. She absorbed that information with a calm mind, the same way she had done during dozens of field exercises where instructors trained her to make decisions in seconds. Her hands stayed loose on the controls, not tense. Tension makes movements jerky. Jerky movements waste time. She steadied her breath and kept the aircraft rolling at a pace that allowed her to reposition without exposing the cockpit. She shifted weight across the landing gear to keep the plane responsive. She felt the surface of the runway through the pedals. Every bump in the gravel told her when she drifted too close to the edge. Every drop in vibration told her the ground was leveling out. She never needed to see the exact terrain. Her body knew it. One lesson from SEAL training shaped everything she did in that moment. When the enemy thinks you are on the defensive, that is the best time to strike. She could sense the attackers regaining confidence as the dust cleared a little. They believed she had run out of room. They believed the aircraft was stuck between the slope and the open field. They assumed she would either try a slow takeoff or abandon the plane. Her training told her to avoid the obvious. Obvious actions get you cornered. Creative actions give you the upper hand. She kept the aircraft angled just slightly off-center, enough to mislead anyone who thought she was committing to a straight line. She made small throttle pulses to disguise her real speed. Instructors had drilled this into her years ago. Never give your enemy an easy read on your momentum. Never move in a predictable rhythm. Predictability is a gift, and she had no intention of giving them one. While she maneuvered, she replayed a training memory that fit the moment perfectly. A nighttime desert drill where she was ordered to escape a simulated ambush with limited visibility, uneven terrain, and an aircraft twice as heavy as the one she was flying now. The instructors had thrown everything at her. Smoke grenades, flashing lights, radio interruptions, even vehicles blocking escape paths. She had passed that drill by using the terrain itself as a weapon, not by speed, not by force, by using the environment the way a strategist uses a board. She felt that same mindset kick in now. She saw not a runway, but a series of opportunities. Loose dirt that could blind, tire ruts that could jolt an attacker off balance, a downhill section that could give the plane a burst of acceleration without warning. She saw the attackers not as a wall, but as pieces out of alignment. Their formation was broken. Their timing was scattered. Their leader lacked visibility. And she had created every bit of that. As she processed all of this, her breathing stayed steady. Her mind stayed open. She made no motion that she had not already accounted for. Her training did not make her fearless. It made her ready. It taught her that fear is information and information is power. It taught her that control is not something you wait for. Control is something you build, moment by moment, choice by choice, until the field belongs to you again. That was exactly what she was doing now. Taking back the field one decision at a time. Turning the chaos she created into a battlefield she understood better than anyone hiding in the grass around her. The attacker's plan falling apart midair did not start with the moment her wheels left the ground. It started seconds earlier, when they misread the sudden shift in engine tone. They thought she was attempting a slow, desperate takeoff, the kind that strained against gravity and exposed the aircraft to easy interception. They prepared to fire warning shots, maybe even force the plane back down if she gained too much altitude. What they did not understand was that she had no intention of climbing straight up. She aimed for a lift that would skim the ground, ride the wind, and break their ability to close in from either side. She kept the aircraft in a shallow rise, letting the wings slice through the remaining dust instead of lifting fully above it. The attackers could hear her, but they could not place her. Every time they thought they had her position, the plane shifted a few degrees, creating a new angle they hadn't planned for. Their entire ambush had been built on the assumption that the aircraft would behave like a predictable transport. Heavy, slow, linear. But the way she flew made the aircraft feel like a different machine altogether. As the dust swirled, the attackers tried to reposition. This was where their plan began to fracture. One group moved too fast, eager to cut off her flight path. Another moved too slow, still confused by the cloud she had created. Their leader tried to shout commands, but wind and engine noise shredded his voice before it reached his men. The clean semicircle they had spent weeks preparing was gone. In its place was a loose, panicked cluster of fighters, each trying to guess the plane's next move instead of executing the strategy they had practiced. She felt the aircraft lighten as it picked up speed. The slope gave her momentum, and the wind carried her forward with just enough lift to stay above the uneven ground. She flew at a height low enough to scrape the tops of the taller patches of grass. The attackers were not prepared for this altitude. Their angles were wrong. Their spacing was wrong. Their timing was wrong. Every step they took pushed them farther from where they needed to be. One attacker tried to sprint across her projected path, hoping to get a clear shot at the cockpit. She saw him at the edge of the dust and adjusted her angle by barely an inch. That inch made all the difference. He overshot his position and stumbled on the uneven dirt, losing his balance. Another tried to flank her from the right, but he misjudged her speed and ended up chasing the aircraft instead of cutting it off. She didn't need to engage them directly. She only needed to stay unpredictable long enough for their plan to collapse under its own weight. As the plane skimmed forward, she used a technique she had practiced during low-altitude threat evasion drills. Small, controlled dips with the wings, each lasting less than a second. To the attackers on the ground, it looked like the aircraft was unstable. They thought she was struggling. They thought they were winning ground. But those dips were intentional. Each dip forced them to re-aim. Each re-aim cost them precious seconds. Seconds they could not spare. The leader tried to rally his men by moving toward the center of the field, but his position made him an easy marker. She recognized him instantly. The way he moved. The way the others kept glancing at him. The way he kept scanning for her shadow on the dust instead of the aircraft itself. Leaders often reveal themselves by what they watch, not what they say. She made a mental note of his location and kept moving. The aircraft hit a smoother patch of ground and gained even more speed. That was when the attackers made their biggest mistake. They split. Half went left, half went right, trying to box her in from both sides. It would have worked on a pilot who favored straight lines. It would have worked on someone who feared losing control. But she had trained for these moments. She understood that when an enemy divides under pressure, they do not create two strong groups. They create two vulnerable ones. She pulled the aircraft into a sweeping tilt that carried her toward the right flank. The attackers there, already moving too fast, overshot their positions again. They expected her to pull up sharply. Instead, she stayed low, letting the plane slide under their anticipation. The left flank tried to compensate, but they were too far away and too slow to adjust. By the time they realized what she was doing, the aircraft had punched through the gap between them. With their formation broken and their timing ruined, the attackers no longer controlled the field. Their perfect ambush had turned into scattered movement, poor communication, and rising panic. They had expected a pilot who would react to danger with fear. Instead, they faced a SEAL who used their own plan against them, turning their midair expectations into the very thing that unraveled their attack. The moment they realized she was the wrong target did not arrive all at once. It crept in through small failures, each one sharper than the last. At first, they still believed they could recover. They told themselves the dust cloud was a fluke, the low skim was reckless luck, the broken formation was temporary. They kept thinking the pilot inside the aircraft was making desperate moves, not calculated ones. But as the minutes stretched and every adjustment they attempted fell apart, the truth began to press in on them. Whoever was flying that plane wasn't reacting like prey. She was moving like someone who understood the battlefield better than they did. As the aircraft shot through the gap between their divided groups, some of the attackers tried to recalibrate. They attempted to tighten their formation, but the ground no longer favored them. The plane's sudden surge forward wiped away their angles, leaving them stranded in positions that no longer matched the plan. One attacker paused, chest heaving, dust streaked across his vest. He watched the aircraft glide far lower and far faster than a transport had any business flying. That was when the first crack of doubt hit him. This pilot was not inexperienced. She was not rattled. She was not following the script they had counted on. The leader tried to shout new commands, but his timing was gone. His authority started slipping the moment he lost sight of the cockpit. Orders are only useful when the people receiving them still trust the person giving them. Right now his men were seeing something he wasn't ready to admit. The way the aircraft shifted weight with precision. The way it hugged the terrain instead of climbing. The way each move countered their position before they could lock into it. They were no longer hunting a transport pilot. They were facing someone who had trained to survive the worst conditions on land and in the air. One of the attackers near the tree line crouched low and watched the aircraft bank through the open stretch of field. He had served years ago under a pilot who once told him that SEAL aviators flew differently. Not smoother, not faster, sharper. They treated the sky like a battlefield, not a highway. They trained in hostile environments where every second mattered. As he watched the aircraft pivot with an angle too deliberate to be guesswork, that memory punched back into his mind. The pilot wasn't avoiding them. She was outmaneuvering them. Deliberately. Methodically. The men closest to the center finally began to understand something was off. The aircraft should have fled by now. Any normal pilot would have pulled up, climbed high, and created distance. Instead, she kept circling. Not wildly. Not by accident. With purpose. She was shaping the field, tightening the radius, forcing them where she wanted them. Ambushers hate being herded. It means the trap is no longer theirs. It means the person they thought they had cornered had flipped the ground beneath them. Every failed rush added weight to the realization. Every misstep made it clearer. One attacker tried to sprint toward higher ground to get a vantage point. The aircraft pivoted sharply and cut off his angle before he could reach it. Another attempted to aim through a clearing, but she shifted just out of view before he completed the motion. They began to see a pattern. She wasn't lucky. She was reading them, reading the wind, reading the terrain, reading the gaps in their strategy faster than they could patch them. The leader felt the shift in morale before he fully understood the reason. His men weren't charging anymore. They were hesitating, watching the sky instead of the ground, looking for cues not from him, but from the pilot's movements. Each time the aircraft banked or dipped, they flinched, not because they feared the plane itself, but because those movements predicted where they would fail next. A good ambush depends on momentum. Theirs had drained away, replaced by uncertainty they couldn't shake. As the aircraft skimmed the field again, lower than before, the leader finally saw it clearly. Precision, intent, control. She wasn't avoiding the fight. She was shaping it. And she was doing it with the kind of calm that comes from training he had only heard stories about. Navy SEALs were known for impossible operations on the ground, but he had never considered what it meant when one of them took the controls of an aircraft. He had never imagined the combination of elite situational awareness and pilot skill working together in a single person. Several attackers backed away without speaking, not because they were ordered to, because instinct told them they were up against something far beyond what they had prepared for. The air was thick with dust, engine noise, and the quiet cracking of their confidence. The moment of realization spread from man to man, subtle at first, then absolute. They had not ambushed a routine pilot. They had not cornered someone inexperienced or fragile. They had stepped into the path of a SEAL who understood how to turn their own battlefield into her advantage. By the time the aircraft completed another tight pass, the attackers no longer saw an easy capture. They saw their mistake written in every move she made. The wrong target, the wrong assumptions, the wrong day to underestimate the person in the cockpit.